Why do people stop valuing you the moment you make yourself fully available? Why does kindness lead to invisibility and attention to exploitation? In this video, we'll reveal the hidden laws of power and psychology that show why stepping back, not stepping up, is often the true path to strength, control, and respect. Inspired by Carl Jung's deep understanding of the unconscious, we'll expose the manipulative games people play with your time and how to break free. In the complex mechanics of human psychology, value is rarely determined by intrinsic qualities alone. It is often assigned based on scarcity, perception, and what one must sacrifice to obtain or retain something. Carl Jung, through his exploration of the unconscious mind, revealed that people rarely see things as they are. They see them as they feel them. And when something, or someone, is constantly available, the psyche begins to register it not as a privilege, but as a default. It becomes background noise, present, but unnoticed. Just as silence amplifies the power of sound, distance amplifies the perception of worth. When you are always available to someone, always replying instantly, always saying yes, always making time, you train them unconsciously to perceive you as a resource, and resources in the social sphere are rarely respected unless they are scarce. The friend who never declines an invitation becomes the last one invited. The partner who is always around becomes the one taken for granted. The employee who never sets boundaries becomes the one endlessly exploited. This is not malice. It is human nature. The mind adapts. It normalizes what is consistent. It devalues what is easy to get. This is why royalty was never common, why leaders sit above, why mystery and ritual surrounded those in power. The more a figure was cloaked in distance or restriction, the more their presence held symbolic weight. Their time was not just time, it was an event. Their appearance, not just a moment, it was a message. And you, whether you recognize it or not, are constantly sending messages through your availability. Every time you drop everything to respond, you are telling the other person, I have nothing more important than this. Even if it is not true, that is how it is received. Jung understood that the unconscious creates narratives from patterns. If you are always there, the unconscious registers your presence as guaranteed. And once something becomes guaranteed, it no longer needs to be protected, respected, even acknowledged. This is the beginning of relational decay, not through conflict, but through the slow erosion of value. The tragedy is, the more you try to be present for everyone, the more invisible you become. You blur into the backdrop of their lives, supportive, dependable, silently fading into irrelevance. There is a deceptive seduction in being the one who's always there. It feeds the ego temporarily, a sense of importance, of being needed, of being chosen. But over time, this role mutates into a trap. You are not chosen for who you are, but for how easily you can be reached. You are not appreciated for your essence, but for your accessibility. And as this pattern deepens, your time becomes less yours. Your energy becomes scattered. Your presence is expected, not requested. The one who was once a person becomes a function. In romantic relationships, excessive availability is particularly lethal. Desire thrives on tension, polarity, and mystery. When you are too accessible, there is no space for longing, no absence to provoke imagination. You become fully known, fully predictable. And predictability is the enemy of romantic intensity. The same person who once craved your attention now looks through you. Not because you changed, but because you became constant. And constancy, earned intimacy, turns into monotony. In social circles, the overly available person often becomes the filler, the one people call when others aren't around, the one who adjusts, who accommodates, who never reschedules. Their reliability becomes their curse, because while everyone values their presence, few truly see them. They are needed, not respected. They are liked, but not prioritized. And beneath the surface, resentment grows, not just from others, but from within. Because deep down, no one wants to feel replaceable. No one wants to feel like the easy option. Even in the professional world, the same rule applies. Those who overextend themselves, who respond instantly to every message, who say yes to every task, they are often the ones overlooked for leadership. Why? Because leaders are scarce. Leaders are focused. Leaders do not dilute their attention. Their time is respected because it is protected. The ones who make themselves too available are seen not as strong, but as servile. not as strategic, but as eager. And eagerness, unless paired with restraint, signals desperation, a trait that repels respect more than failure ever could. The cruel irony is that in trying to be everything to everyone, you become almost nothing to yourself. Your time is not yours. Your identity is scattered across the expectations of others. And slowly, silently, you disappear, not from the world, but from yourself. Jung warned of this dissolution of the self, where a person's ego becomes entirely shaped by their relationships, roles, and responsibilities. The individuation process, the journey toward becoming whole, is halted when one is constantly reacting to others instead of asserting the boundaries of their own presence. Power in human relationships is not achieved by force, nor merely by words, but by the manipulation of perception. And perception is shaped most not by what is seen, but by what is withheld. To make yourself less available, to retreat deliberately, not out of weakness but strategy, is to alter the gravitational pull you have on others. The silent withdrawal, the intentional absence, the carefully measured distance, these become more commanding than any direct assertion of dominance. Carl Jung understood that the human psyche fills in gaps with projections. When something or someone is not fully revealed, the mind compensates. It imagines, wonders, speculates, and in doing so, elevates that which is unseen. Absence, therefore, becomes not a void, but a mirror that reflects back to others their own desires, fears, and assumptions. When you remove yourself from the immediate reach of others, not in bitterness, but with precision, you create an invisible force. People begin to notice the lack of you. In the beginning, it is merely a curiosity, but curiosity deepens into tension. Questions arise: why the silence? Why the delay? Why the distance? This mental dissonance destabilizes their previous perceptions of you. You are no longer the predictable figure they once controlled. You are now something unknown. The human mind cannot tolerate uncertainty for long. It seeks resolution. And that need drives people toward you, not because of who you are, but because of what your absence suggests you might be. Withholding your presence challenges the modern addiction to constant contact. We live in an age where people believe that instant access is their right. To delay response, to choose silence, is to challenge this entitlement. And that challenge, when done with calm authority, unsettles people in ways they do not immediately understand. They begin to question your emotional state, your intentions, your priorities. This is not manipulation in the crude sense. It is psychological leverage. It is the quiet imposition of power through control of attention. Jung often wrote about the shadow, the repressed aspects of the self, hidden from consciousness. When you withhold your presence, others are forced to confront their shadow in relation to you. Their neediness, insecurity, dependence, and fear of abandonment rise to the surface. You become the trigger, not by acting, but by not acting. And through this, your influence increases, because those who stir emotion, especially in their absence, are those who hold the deepest psychological power. You are no longer just a person in their life. You become a symbol, a force, an unresolved thought that lingers. Consider the leaders of history who were feared and revered not because they spoke often, but because they spoke rarely. Their silence was not emptiness, it was weight. Their distance was not disengagement, it was calculation. In court politics, in royal chambers, in every realm where power thrives, the one who speaks last and appears least holds the greatest sway, because their very absence causes others to fill the room with speculation and self-doubt. Your disappearance can echo louder than your words ever could. In personal relationships, this principle is even more visceral. When you are too present, the emotional terrain becomes flat. There is no tension, no pull. You become emotionally predictable. And predictability kills magnetism. But when you become less reachable, when your availability is no longer guaranteed, the emotional energy shifts. The other person begins to lean in. They attempt to re-engage, to seek you out, to understand what shifted. That pursuit, even if subtle, grants you influence, not through domination, but through psychological positioning. There is a primal instinct at work here. In nature, the one who retreats first is often seen as the one who controls the rhythm of the encounter. When you step back, it suggests you are not desperate. It suggests you have options. It suggests you are whole without their presence. And this, more than any declaration of strength, draws people in. Because independence, when authentic, is magnetic. And that magnetism is amplified when it is not flaunted, but simply demonstrated through behavior. Jung believed the process of individuation required a withdrawal from the collective, a stepping back from the herd to discover one's true self. This withdrawal is not just internal, it is a message to the external world. It says, I am not here to perform. I am not here to entertain. I am not here to soothe your fears with constant presence. I am here on my own terms. That message, when communicated through absence rather than speech, becomes more powerful than any argument, because it forces others to see you not as someone they can summon at will, but as someone whose presence must be earned. In this withholding, you reclaim your narrative. You shift the frame from being reactive to being enigmatic. You stop being the one who constantly proves your worth and become the one whose worth is assumed simply because you are no longer easily seen. The conscious act of stepping back is not a retreat. It is a reshaping of power. It is the silent reassertion of control in a world addicted to noise. The more you remove your presence from spaces that do not value you, the more those spaces begin to feel your absence as a loss. Not a loss of function, but a loss of essence. Time is the most misunderstood currency of power. Unlike money or influence, it cannot be earned back once it is spent. And yet, people treat it as if it were infinite, sacrificing it to obligations, distractions, and demands that yield nothing in return. Carl Jung understood that every moment surrendered to what is meaningless is a moment stripped from the process of becoming whole. When you give your time without discernment, you dilute your essence. When you become available at every request, you do not merely lose minutes, you lose command over your life. To reclaim your time, then, is not an act of selfishness. It is the foundation of sovereignty. It is the conscious refusal to be ruled by others' expectations, and the first step toward individuation, the formation of the true self. Most people drift through their days reacting. They respond to texts, answer calls, jump into conversations, accept invitations, and engage in rituals of social maintenance that serve no real purpose beyond avoiding discomfort. This constant responsiveness, this addiction to being accessible, fragments the mind. It divides attention into pieces too small to be useful and too scattered to form clarity. The individual becomes a servant to every interruption. And in that slavery, the most vital parts of the self, reflection, ambition, direction, wither in silence. The reclaiming of time begins with a brutal recognition. Most of what is demanded of you is not necessary. Most people do not want your presence. They want your compliance. They want access to your attention so they can alleviate their own boredom, validate their insecurities, or secure their own goals. In this dynamic, you become a tool, not out of malice, but out of the deep unconscious tendency for people to consume what is freely given. Jung explored the nature of projection, where others assign roles to you based on their own inner voids. If you are always available, you are always present to receive those projections, and they will shape you. You will begin to mistake their needs for your purpose. This erosion of self is slow, but it is deadly. A person who has lost control of their time cannot concentrate long enough to build anything meaningful. And more importantly, they cannot access the stillness required for transformation. In Jungian thought, the unconscious reveals its truths, not in noise but in silence. Modern life is filled with noise precisely because silence is dangerous. It forces you to confront what you have been avoiding. Reclaiming time, then, is not just about scheduling better or saying no more often. It is a psychological revolution. It is the decision to move from the periphery of your own life to its center. When you begin to limit your availability, something strange happens. The world resists. People grow irritated. They accuse you of being distant, cold, arrogant, or selfish. This is not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are disrupting the equilibrium they were comfortable with. When you were constantly accessible, they had control. They could reach into your time and extract what they needed. Now, with your presence no longer guaranteed, they must confront their own dependence. That confrontation often takes the form of guilt, tripping, or subtle punishment. It is the unconscious mind attempting to pull you back into servitude. You must learn to recognize these manipulations for what they are: desperate attempts to reclaim access to a resource that is no longer on tap. When you reclaim your time, you shift the hierarchy. You are no longer the ever-available provider. You are now a gatekeeper, and gatekeepers are respected because they decide. Their value is not only in what they offer, but in their ability to withhold. This does not mean you must become cruel or distant. It means you must become intentional. Every hour spent must have meaning. Every conversation must be a choice, not a reflex. Carl Jung spoke of the self as the totality of the psyche, the integration of conscious and unconscious forces into a unified whole. This process cannot occur if your energy is endlessly divided among shallow engagements and hollow tasks. Your time must be treated as sacred, because through time, all transformation occurs. Through time, you learn, create, evolve, and awaken, but only if that time is protected from the erosion of constant obligation. There is a hidden violence in being too available. It teaches others that your life is open territory. It convinces them that your schedule exists to accommodate theirs. This illusion must be shattered, not through words but through action, through deliberate pauses, through the space you create between their demand and your decision. In that space, you reclaim authority. You no longer exist as a reaction. You exist as a presence, rooted in your own rhythm, answering only to what aligns with your deepest direction. The modern world seduces you into believing that business is productivity and availability is virtue. True power is found in focus, and focus cannot exist without solitude. To be available to everyone is to be loyal to no one, not even yourself. In the subtle war of human relationships, words often disguise reality, and actions cloak their true motives. People swear loyalty, claim love, profess devotion, yet these proclamations dissolve the moment you cease to serve their needs. Detachment, the act of removing your constant presence, becomes the most efficient filter. When you are no longer available on demand, you create a silent test, one that reveals the inner architecture of others' intentions without confrontation. Carl Jung taught that the unconscious reveals itself, not when everything is calm and familiar, when patterns are broken, when the structure of expectation collapses. And so, when you detach, when you withdraw your habitual presence, those around you are stripped of their scripts. What remains is truth. True loyalty is not dependent on access. It does not vanish in your absence. It does not wither when convenience is removed. Rather, it persists, even strengthens, when the dynamic of power is shifted. But most relationships are not built on such foundations. They are built on proximity, usefulness, and emotional habit. You become the reliable listener, the perpetual fixer, the provider of comfort, the absorber of projection. When you step away, not with bitterness, but with silent clarity, you remove the function you once served. What remains is not a void. It is a mirror. And in that mirror, others see themselves clearly, perhaps for the first time. Detachment unsettles those who have grown accustomed to your compliance. They confuse love with obedience, connection with frequency, loyalty with availability. When you detach, these illusions begin to crumble. The ones who truly respect you will adjust. They will not demand, chase, or guilt. They will wait, reflect, and understand. But those who depended on your presence to avoid facing themselves will react with anger, confusion, or abandonment. Not because you harmed them, but because you disrupted the role they needed you to play. And roles, once disturbed, force the psyche to confront its own shadows. Jung's concept of the shadow is central here. Everyone carries within them hidden motives, needs they cannot admit, impulses they cannot name. When you are always available, you allow others to remain unconscious of their dependence. They do not need to explore why they reach for you, why they demand your time, why they expect your energy. But when you step away, they are forced to face those impulses without a buffer. Detachment does not cause conflict. It reveals it, exposes the internal dependencies that were masked by comfort. In romantic relationships, this is especially evident. The one who always gives is often seen as weak until they stop giving. The one who always responds is taken for granted until they fall silent, and then suddenly their value is recognized. But often not out of love, but out of panic. The panic of losing control, the panic of being alone with one's unfulfilled desires. If the connection was rooted in authenticity, detachment deepens it. But if it was rooted in need, detachment destroys it. And this is the precise function of distance: to purify, to clarify, to separate the real from the illusory. In friendships, the same pattern emerges. The one who initiates, who plans, who listens, who accommodates. This person becomes the structural support of the relationship. When that support is withdrawn, the entire structure is tested. If the bond was mutual, effort will flow from both sides. If not, silence will replace presence. And that silence will speak the truth louder than any confrontation ever could. You do not need to accuse, argue, or explain. You only need to observe what happens when you are no longer available. The response, or lack thereof, is the confession. Professional and social environments operate under similar dynamics. Those who consistently give more than they receive of their time, energy, focus are often unappreciated until they impose distance. Suddenly, their absence disrupts the system, tasks are delayed, conversations stall, progress halts. And the question arises, why was this person not valued before? The answer is simple. Their availability masked their value. Like oxygen, they were only noticed once they were no longer present. Detachment reveals this imbalance and forces recalibration. It demands others either rise to the level of reciprocity or fade out of relevance. Detachment is not the abandonment of care. It is the restructuring of power. It says, I will no longer participate in dynamics that diminish me. I will no longer offer myself to those who only know how to take. And in doing so, it separates the genuine from the opportunistic. Jung believed that individuation, the journey toward becoming one's true self, requires the cutting of false ties. Not with hatred, but with awareness. Detachment is the scalpel that makes this possible. It is the silence that reveals dependency, the stillness that exposes exploitation, the distance that clarifies devotion. Through detachment, you reclaim the ability to see people not as they present themselves, but as they truly are. The frantic friend, the clinging partner, the demanding colleague. All are stripped of their performance when you no longer dance to their rhythm. And you, in turn, begin to see yourself with new clarity. You realize how much of your life was shaped by the expectations of others. You begin to recognize how rarely you acted from your own center. Detachment grants this perspective not through analysis, but through absence. It is a cleansing, a burning away of the superficial to expose what is essential. Loyalty, then, is not proven by how people behave when you're constantly there. It is proven by how they act when you step away. Do they reach out? Do they reflect? Do they grow in the silence? Or do they disappear into indifference? Detachment reveals what persistence conceals. It is not an end. It is a beginning. The beginning of knowing who is truly with you and who was merely with your availability. When you stop being available, the world around you begins to shift. Not because the world has changed, but because your position in it has. You are no longer the echo that answers every call, the figure that bends to every demand, the presence that fills every absence. Instead, you become a mirror, a silence, a space others must now earn. This transformation is not an act of arrogance, it is an act of clarity. Carl Jung knew that individuation, the path to becoming whole, requires the courage to stand apart from the collective noise, to detach from roles that were never truly yours, and to reclaim the self that was bartered away in exchange for approval, comfort, and false connection. In this detachment, your power crystallizes. You begin to understand the subtle mechanics of influence, not through control, but through absence, not through assertion, but through the restraint of your presence. You begin to see who values you when you offer nothing but yourself. No favors, no appeasement, no constant availability. You watch as projection falls away, as masks slip, as the loyal remain and the opportunistic scatter, and you realize that your time, your energy, your presence are not currencies to be handed out freely. They are sovereign assets to be invested where there is depth, integrity, and reciprocity. Silence becomes your ally. Distance becomes your strategy. Stillness becomes your strength. Through the deliberate act of becoming less available, you become more powerful, more respected, more true. Not because you demanded it, but because you finally stopped giving yourself away.